And we're live. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. My name is Juras, and as every week, I'm joined by Glenn Highcove. Man, how are you feeling on this Friday evening?
Hey, happy Friday, everybody. Doing okay. Staying pretty busy. I know everybody's probably staying busy and stressed, so I think it's a good opportunity to look at another interesting case. And this one interestingly kind of straddles where I live. I think it starts off to the south of me, and then it ends up to the north of me.
Yeah, totally, man. Today, we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Arianna Fitts, but this case is kind of a double case because it also involves the murder of Ariana's mother, Nicole Fitts. So, for everyone who's listening to this or watching this on the YouTube channel, now you can see on the screen on the left hand side, we have Nicole Fitts, and on the right hand side, we have Arianna Fitts. So these are the two, let's say, victims in this case. Nicole is the one who has been murdered, and Arianna is the one who is still missing. And the interesting point in this case that, usually when there's a missing persons case, everyone kind of suspects that the missing person is no longer alive. But in this case, the consensus with I guess the majority of the investigators as well as the victims' family members is that Ariana is still alive, and this is why I think it was so important for us this week to talk about it, because I mean this little girl, she could still be out there alive, and I guess the more people that talk about this case is only good. Nothing bad will come out of this. Like if you can all come together, share this information about Ariana, maybe she could actually be located, because I personally believe there's a high chance that Ariana could be alive. Now, I want to quickly jump to the case profile so that everyone could get reintroduced better with this disappearance slash murder case. I want to quickly jump to what was happening here in general. So, as I've said, Arianna Fitts was 2 years of age at the time of her disappearance, and her mother, Nicole Fitts, that you can see on the left hand side, was 32 years of age at the time of her murder. Because let's remember, Nicole Fitts has been murdered. Now, both were reported missing on Tuesday, April 5th, 2016, in San Francisco, California. Nicole Fitts was last seen on Friday, April 1st. However, her 2-year-old daughter Ariana had not been seen since mid-February 2016, approximately somewhere around like 6 weeks from what I've gathered before she was reported missing. And I know this is very confusing right now, but it will make a lot more sense very soon, guys. Arianna Fitts is still missing at this point, while her mother's body was discovered buried in the John McLaren Park on Friday, April 8th, 2 days after she was reported missing. So we have one person who is dead and one person who is missing. Before I jump into the timeline, dude, any like initial thoughts about this case?
Yeah, that was a great intro. It's it's an interesting case because like we've if you look at like our show, our library of shows from a criminology perspective, we often try to pick things that maybe are either like really infamous, or maybe they're notable of a certain kind of crime. And we've had a lot of abductions, especially of kids, um, and we've had a lot of murders, especially of women. And this has both, but then it also has something that's interesting that we're like you said, the prognosis for the victim seems to be a lot more positive in some ways than a lot of the other cases. And it's notable that like this is, I think, a case about kind of profiling what kind of kidnapping it is, who the offenders might be, and how they're different than kind of the standard, you know, let's face it, like a male creepo that does something. It's not. It's a little more nuanced in this perspective. And then the other thing is, some of what goes on here reminded me a lot of like what Casey Anthony's excuse was for what happened to her kid. Remember that?
Yeah.
The kid, the babysitter did it, and it was like, well, that's interesting because, here we are some years later, and something's kind of interesting. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's going in that direction, but it like might actually be the truth in this case.
Yeah, no, I totally I understand your sentiment, but I want to now jump to the timeline of this disappearance slash murder case. So I want to quickly start off with Nicole Fitts, even before she had her daughter, Arianna. And this is going to be a little bit of a brief background in Nicole Fitts' life. Now, I know you've looked into Nicole Fitts' childhood a little bit more, and maybe we could talk about that right now, actually, briefly. But I really want to just jump to a few points, and then I'll throw it back to you, man. Maybe you will be able to flesh it out. So the first point I want to make sure I mention here is that Nicole Fitts, the mother of Arianna in this case, that it has been found murdered 2 days after she was reported missing. She grew up as a middle child of 3 sisters, and she was also raised by a single mother. Now, Nicole has been described as shy and naive growing up, but she seemed to have been an incredibly kind and compassionate and driven young woman. She was doing a lot of volunteering in her childhood. She even received some sort of an award back in Los Angeles, I believe, for her volunteer work as she was a young teenager. Now, I want to stop at this point because that's all I know about her childhood growing up. I know you've done a little bit more research into that angle. Do you want to also like shed some light about her childhood before we move into the more relevant timeline to this, murder disappearance case?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to build up the picture of the victim here, one of the things I thought was interesting, if we're going to if we're going to tell a story here that maybe has to do with like life paths. Sometimes the people don't even get to choose for themselves, right? So I'll say, case in point, she is one of what, 3 daughters of a single mother. I don't have any real background on how that came about, but I can imagine that's challenging. It's challenging to parent one kid, let alone 3, especially by yourself. But then also, like, economically, that's just one income now in the household. But despite that, like you mentioned, Nicole had this big community involvement, won an award for it when they were living down there. I think in Culver City, which is kind of like, let's just say it's basically part of LA. It's technically not LA, but it is. So after that, what is interesting is also there's reports of that her, up to this point, up to a point in high school, everything's fine in terms of like her grades, and I think it's reported that she was known to be a good student. But then all of a sudden, something tragic happens.
What Glenn was going to mention here is that Nicole's mother had passed away while Nicole was still in high school, so this essentially left the 3 sisters to fend for themselves as they no longer had anyone from their parents to help them out with, whatever they were doing. Bad enough that she only had one parent. What happened next was, yeah.
Yeah. What happened next just amplified it. And maybe this is really where, like, a lot of her life started to come apart, and not by her own doing.
So, from what I'm gathering, her mother passed away, right? So these 3 sisters who only had one mother, I assume the father was not in the picture, the mother passed away. So 3 sisters were essentially left to fend for themselves. Once again, Nicole Fitts was the middle child. She had an older sister as well as a younger sister. The younger sister's name was Tessa, And I mention her name because she actually will play a part in this case. I don't really have a lot of information about her oldest sister. The only thing I've heard here and there during my research that apparently all of the three sisters were in some sort of a foster care program, right?
Yeah, that's at least what I turned up was someone speculating that what must have happened, because apparently there's no mention of other relatives. Like you think, normally let's say, there's children and their parents die. Um, the state would first, I think, try, after taking custody of the kids, just to sort out who goes where. Generally the state would look to like other family members, like an uncle, an aunt, a grandmother, somebody that was related to them. So that's interesting to me too, because I'm like, gosh, was their poor mother out there just by herself? Like, so was their mother already kind of living like a lone wolf, having to defend for herself and not having, like what happened to her support system? So that's interesting to me, that if they went into the foster system, well, they're only going to be there for a couple of years, right? Because they were all already in high school.
Yes.
So given the spread of ages, you figure as soon as you hit 18, I mean, that they've tried to kind of make a better program now, but it used to be you hit 18 and you're out, and then it's like you better figure out how to feed yourself.
Yeah, no, I understand. Now, moving forward to 2012, because that's where my line of the timeline begins, Nicole and her younger sister Tessa, as well as Tessa's girlfriend Claire, because I feel like, you know what I mean, Tessa had the girlfriend, so she was gay. You know what I mean? That's probably not something super important to mention, but like I just wanted to mention this fact so that people would understand that, Nicole, younger sister Tessa was gay, and she had like a girlfriend named Claire, and all of these three, the group of three, moved in to an apartment together in a town called Pacifica, which is located in the south of San Francisco. Like want to jump on the map really quickly so people would understand what's happening. Pacifica is this little location that you can see on the map. It has the yellow colored marker. Now, yes,
I want to interrupt for a second. I only just thought of this now,
yes,
but maybe you mentioning the sisters' relationship is important in a way, because it's like, well, what brought them to this area? And you figure, well, in some communities, there's still a lot of like backlash against, like, LGBT, you know, Q plus, etc. People. So it may have been that originally this is where her sister and her partner felt safe, and felt like there was a community for them. So maybe that's why anybody that is planning to maybe live pool their money together, well, like now you're kind of dependent on their choice of like housing locations, right?
yep, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. San Francisco is known to be a good community for, people from LGBTQ plus and all of that. Now, moving on, so they move in. Uh, Not much has been said about Nicole during this time in 2012 as the group of three moved into Pacifica, but at some point she became pregnant and had a daughter named Cindy. So that's where things start to kind of become very difficult for the group, especially for Nicole, because the group essentially couldn't afford to stay in Pacifica. I think maybe because, Nicole had her first daughter, Sandy, and later on she will have her next daughter, Arianna, that's missing still. Sandy is not missing. Arianna is missing, but we're still talking about Sandy. So when she had Sandy, from what I'm gathering, she wasn't able to work as much. So the group of three couldn't afford to live in Pacifica. As I've said, Tessa and her girlfriend Claire moved out, while Nicole, who was at that point pregnant with her second daughter, Ariana, ended up in a homeless shelter. Now, Sandy, her first daughter, was sent to live with Nicole's dad back in LA or something like that. So at this point, Nicole becomes pregnant with Sandy. She has Sandy, and then shortly after, from what I'm assuming, she becomes pregnant with another daughter named Arianna. And the interesting part here is that we do not know any information about the fathers at all. Is this the same father or anything like that? That was
Uh,
kind of,
um,
oh yeah,
yeah, no, let me jump in. I don't know who Ariana's father is. I did run into I think the name of the father of the first daughter. Is the
Sandy.
first daughter's name Cindy? Yeah.
Yeah.
So so yeah, he lived someplace else. He lived, I think, back down in the southern part of the state, back down in San Diego.
Oh,
So that was a problem, was that she had, at one point, she had voluntarily sent her daughter to go live with the father because of this exact kind of, financial and life stresses, and whatever other stresses are going on. But then I guess, we'll get into this later, but for the timeline purposes right now, yeah, that's part of what's going on in the situation, is we don't really know, or I don't know what I've seen so far, who the father of this Ariana child is. In fact, there's a lot of big question marks around, I think, both the conception of both of their kids and how that happened, and it's sort of a missing hole in the narrative, because that's like, if everybody gave one and two, that's like having a child before your early 20s, or not having someone else to share the responsibilities and you know household income.
yeah.
That's also gonna put you at a pretty big disadvantage.
Totally. I want to quickly apologize. I think I messed up there in the beginning. I said that Cindy was sent to live with Nicole's father. I think Nicole's father is completely out of the picture here. So I kind of got confused there. So yeah, I want to quickly apologize. As Nicole, while she was still pregnant and living in a homeless shelter in San Francisco, she sent Sandy to live with Sandy's father, you know what I mean? Not with Nicole's father. So just want to quickly erase that little mistake. Got a little confused back there. I hope this is not confusing the audience members, of course. Now, jumping back to what happened next. So, as I've said, Nicole is now at this homeless shelter, and she began a relationship with Lemessani Briggs, who was some sort of a street pastor. I think Lemessani Briggs was definitely someone who would, she was a woman who would come into these homeless shelters, and she would talk to the people who were living in these homeless shelters. Now, I have no idea what kind of a relationship this was. Was this like a romantic relationship or what's happening there? I have no idea. But shortly after, Nicole moves out of the homeless shelter, and she begins living with Lemessani. At this point, she already gave birth to Arianna. I think she gave birth to Arianna while she was still living in the homeless shelter, or maybe, right before birth, she was she was living with her sisters or something like that, you know what I mean? Because she was pretty close with her younger sister, Tessa, for sure. Probably also close with her older sister, but the older sister is not really mentioned in this case all that much, so I don't want to speculate there. Now, as this is happening, Nicole initially paid Lemessani Briggs rent and also paid Lemessani to watch Arianna while she worked at a local Best Buy. So on the map, now, I'm not really certain of Lemessani's home, but I was able to pinpoint this particular house as named to as Lemessani Briggs was living in this house. So I'm not sure if she was living at that point in this house, but this is the place where I found Lemessani was living at. And then we have the local Best Buy in San Francisco. I think there's only one Best Buy in San Francisco. Pretty sure it's this Best Buy that you can see on the map right here. So wanna quickly, you know what I mean, do this. This is the Best Buy. Just want to mark them. This is Lemasani Briggs's apartment. So once again, Nicole's working and paying rent as well as babysitting fees to Lemasani. I want to quickly jump to what happened next. Yeah, you want to step in?
Yeah, I don't know if you plan to say this, but this is, I think, where the things start to turn sinister, because this arrangement with the rent and then childcare, right? Because this was the whole crisis. The whole crisis was, someone else mentioned this on one of the other YouTubes I looked at, and I think it's a good point. One of the big like holes you can fall into, for people living in the poverty line or below it, or people that are on welfare, you often have this like catch-22, where like you can't get a job unless you have childcare, but childcare is expensive. So like there are actually like there actually are subsidies for childcare that are supposed to be for people like Nicole. I don't know why she wasn't getting it. I could speculate why. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, anyways, so that you can see why it's a problem, right? You don't have money, you need money to make money, basically, and you need someone to take care of your kid, who, that's expensive. It can be a tremendous amount of money a month. It can be as much as like rent in some places, though not San Francisco rent, which is also another factor going on here. It's just ridiculously high rents in this part of the country, and then even this part of my state, it's one of the most expensive cities to live in, probably in the world, but especially in California.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah. Anyways, what happens? What's sinister is, when she starts making money, all of a sudden these expenses seem to like magically scale. You know what I mean? It's always just enough money to like basically leave her in the same place she was the week before. Like she never gets to build up savings, because this Lemasani lady is basically doing what like a pimp does, except it doesn't seem to be about, prostitution services, but it's doing the same thing, basically taking all of her money.
Right. And also at the same time, Lemasani becomes strangely possessive of Arianna, Nicole's daughter, in a sense that Nicole never received the key to Lemasani's apartment that she was paying rent for. And so I heard stories that she had to sometimes wait for multiple hours outside of Lemasani's apartment before she would let her in. Well, she was probably out somewhere with Arianna, like in the playground or something like that. So Lemasani at this point, from what I'm gathering, becomes very protective and possessive of Arianna and Nicole. At that point, thinks that this is definitely a bad setup. Now we have a take about this whole situation from Nicole's younger sister Tessa. Now Tessa claims that Lemasani was taking advantage of Nicole at this time, and Nicole would actually frequently receive abusive text messages. So eventually, Lemasani's nieces, Ciolo Hearn and Helena Hearn Martin, began babysitting Arianna. Now, this is getting confusing here. So this Lemasani woman, this street preacher, now is no longer babysitting Arianna, but her nieces are babysitting Arianna. And apparently the nieces were on no speaking terms with Lemasani, and we don't really have any information how that arrangement began. However, we do have some interesting information about Helena Hearn Martin. Apparently, she had murdered her previous husband, and now she was living with a man named Devin Martin. I'm not really sure how she's like, out and about, not in jail for that, but a lot of like gray areas we will encounter. Really quickly, dude, before stopping here, do you have any idea how this switch from giving your child for babysitting to Lemasani switched from Lemasani to her nieces? Like, that's a gray area. It just kind of happened like that, right?
Yeah, it almost seems designed, right? But and then meanwhile, I mean, the way Nicole's taking these treatments, this kind of treatment from this person. I mean, she's not ever really significantly pushing back, right, or not following through. And I guess that's the other thing is she's part of a vulnerable probably part of multiple vulnerable populations, depending on how you define each one of those populations. But yeah, she's definitely at risk. She's and apparently she feels like she has no recourse, right? Or in other words, she would have taken her kid back and walked probably a lot earlier.
Definitely. In November of 2015, Tessa and her girlfriend Claire picked Nicole and Arianna from Lemessani's Briggs apartment. Now, Lemessani allegedly continued to harass Nicole, texting Nicole to bring back my baby, like bring my baby back here, in reference to Arianna, Nicole's daughter, that Lemessani became super possessive and weird about. At this time, Nicole was once again homeless because she was no longer staying with Lemessani, while her daughter was taken care of by Lemessani's nieces, Helena and Ciolo. She was frequently sleeping on acquaintances' couches and commuting from Santa Cruz to San Francisco to still work at this local Best Buy. I don't know why, but she was really attached to this Best Buy. And dude, I want to jump quickly to the map here to illustrate the distance as the crow flies. The distance is around 60 miles, but you're definitely not driving as the crow flies. This is like a
Yeah, man,
2 hour drive, man.
it is. It's brutal. And then I mean, that's not even factoring in traffic. So I've actually driven that a couple of times each way. It's a great drive, by the way. It's beautiful depending which way you go. I don't know that she was going the beautiful way because yeah, just traffic wise, like you said, it's really inefficient. So, by the way, once again, stick a pin in this. Is this like a smart way to operate? So I get maybe her comfort level. Her confidence level in herself may be really low. So that might be why she feels so attached to that specific Best Buy because she just really feels like that's the only thing she knows how to do. And I think we can all relate to that. But this is not practical. So once again, this whole plan isn't working out. Like I think that's kind of a theme. I know, I think maybe a lot of people notice when they watch this. These are like not a lot of good decisions so far. It's a really expensive place to live, and then you're trying to keep like an okay job, but like it's never going to pay for itself there, right? Like a Best Buy job is never going to pay rent in San Francisco, even when it's
Yeah.
in San Francisco.
Yeah, real quickly on the map, want to mention a few facts. So this is the Best Buy in San Francisco. So as we know already, Lemessani goes all the way for around, like, let's say 2 hours, all the way from Santa Cruz to Best Buy every day. She is being driven there by her, I believe, sister. I don't know how that works. Like, how much does the gas money cost and all of that? Now, the interesting point I want to say, so this is Lemessani Briggs's home. As I've said, Lemessani Briggs is completely out of the picture here. And I believe, yeah, somewhere after November 2015, Lemessani Briggs is completely out of the picture. Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn are now in the picture. But the interesting part about Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn is that I couldn't really pinpoint their exact living locations, because I did find on one of the sources that I've looked at, they were mentioned as living in San Francisco. However, in another source, they have been mentioned as living in Oakland/Emersville locations. So we don't really know where exactly they were living, but the only thing we know is that Arianna was staying with Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn. You know what I mean? Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn, they were not living in the same apartment. Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn were sisters. They were nieces of Lemasani Briggs. Helena Hearn had a husband called Devin Martin. Ciolo Hearn, I don't think she had a husband or anything like that. So that's the general setup of what's happening so far in this case. I hope this makes sense so far. As I've said, the timeline here has been a little bit confusing in this case. I haven't really seen anyone really online kind of flesh this out, so I'm trying to do as best as I can here. Now, at the same time as all of this is happening, Nicole cannot catch a break because Cindy's, her first daughter's father, loses custody of Cindy. So now we don't know really why, at least I didn't find the reason why, but now Nicole finds herself all of a sudden, as she's doing this crazy 2-hour drive to this Best Buy that pays minimum wage, she now has to constantly go back and forth to Los Angeles for like court hearings to fight the case and try to gain custody of Sandy. Dude, you want to chime in on that whole situation a little bit?
I mean, first I gotta ask. I mean, just let's just be objective. Is she in a position to take care of Cindy? Because it doesn't sound like she's even in a position to take care of herself. But okay, we'll stick a pin in that. Yeah, I mean that's going on. I mean, she's getting pulled in all these different directions, and I can't. I guess let's think of the people that are taking care of her kid, because part of what's going on, like you said, is she's doing that big commute, but she's also sometimes spending like a week at a, even before, you know, she had been kind of separated for a longer period of time. It had become a habit to spend as much as a week away from her daughter. So from that perspective, you can imagine people outside of her are noticing that like she's not spending a lot of time with her kid, just out of necessity, really, not necessarily because she doesn't want to. But then from that perspective, it's like, but what are their opinions, I wonder, about the situation?
Yeah, totally, man. Now, Nicole does catch a break eventually in this timeline. She was actually one of the co-workers at Best Buy offered Arianna a place to stay at this time. Uh, so this is really good for her. And this was Goyote Williams. This is the location of where Goyote Williams was living here. As I've said, this was the Best Buy, so the whole 2-hour commute was no longer a thing. The commute was pretty close, you know what I mean? Because like these two distances are not that far away. Now at this point, Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn, which once again, I don't really know if it was this location that they were living or was it like were they living in San Francisco, or were they living in Oakland or Emersville? I don't really know. But now all of a sudden, dude, if you can see, Nicole becomes she starts living in a very close proximity to where her daughter Arianna was being babysat at. And now she is a lot more like able to see her daughter on a way more frequent basis. So Helena Hearn and Ciolo Hearn become very, very like sketchy at this point, and they start kind of denying visitation for Nicole to even see her own daughter. They would make up excuses like, oh, we're out at the park, you can't come over. And at this point, like Helena and Ciolo, they become super possessive. Like, does this make any sense to you, man? And, your take.
Well, yeah, I mean, so what you got to wonder at this point is, what do they want? And it seems like they want Arianna, right?
Yeah, kind of does. Kind of does seem exactly like that's what's happening so far in this case. Now, in mid-March 2016, Nicole contacted Ciolo and Helena in order to pick up Arianna only to be told that the pair had allegedly taken Arianna to Disneyland, a fact Nicole was not told about beforehand. Your take about that, man? Like, it seems like they were doing anything they wanted with this kid.
Yeah, it's like they're breaking all the boundaries. They're just it's their. I mean, but by the way, though, if they really went to Disneyland, that's not cheap. So they're kind of acting like that's their kid already, right?
Yeah, totally. At this point, Tessa, Nicole's younger sister, and her girlfriend Claire said that they had not seen Arianna since February, and it is not known how long it has been since Nicole had last seen her. But the one time frame that I've found during my research is that apparently Nicole hadn't seen her daughter at that point for 6 weeks, even though she was living kind of in the very close proximity. She was living in the same city, but hasn't seen her daughter in 6 weeks. And that was definitely very suspicious to me how that is even possible, because I would assume you would I mean, not seeing your kid for like 1 week is kind of like acceptable, I guess, in a weird way, but like 6 weeks, that's like almost 2 months, man. So your take on that?
Yeah. So this is, I think, gets back to well, the one thing was I was going to say it reminds me that's what Casey Anthony said happened, right? Oh, I haven't seen she's with the babysitters for 6 weeks. Um, but no, in this case though, like it makes you think that probably Nicole is not really. A couple things. Either she might not have full agency over herself. You know what I mean? She may not feel comfortable going to the authorities for whatever reason, and that isn't to say that she did anything wrong. She just may feel like naturally uncomfortable trying to challenge the situation. She may feel like she did something wrong that she could get in trouble for by even letting it get this far gone, even though she's actually the victim here, right? In theory. So it's interesting to think that like that might actually be used. That might be some of the nasty stuff that they said to her. Well, you ready? We'll call CPS. But here's the other thing: is my kind of big thesis this episode, and I'll break it down at the end, is that um, we're seeing essentially people that are living at a level. People are almost living living in a different part of society where the rules that govern that society, I mean, sometimes are impacted by the real rules, like the laws, but there's a lot of like unofficial stuff going on, and there's kind of almost like a second set of like street rules or street laws going on, if you know what I mean. And I think that's kind of what you're starting to see here. Is I almost feel like it feels like forces are taking over the parenting of a child that maybe, right or wrong, those same kind of like it's called the underground. They're sort of looking at this and they're like, this kid seems like a good kid, and the mother doesn't really seem capable.
Yeah, I
I
see
don't
what you
know.
mean. Yeah, now moving along, right, in the timeline here, I want to quickly check my notes again. As I've said, so now I want to jump to the most relevant timeline. So I hope this sort of introduction into the timeline made some sense to our audience members. Now I want to jump to the actual few days that everything kind of kicks off, right? So I want to jump to Friday, April 1st of 2016. This is the day when Nicole was last seen. As I've said, Nicole was last seen on April 1st, but Nicole's daughter Arianna has been seen hasn't been seen at that point by anyone in like 4 or 5 weeks or something like that, because no one really saw Nicole with Arianna. Arianna was kind of staying all the time with Ciolo, as well as Helena, you know what I mean? So Friday, April 1st, this is the day when Nicole decided enough is enough and I will get my daughter back from Helena and Ciolo. So it all kicks off after she received a phone call to meet, Helena Hearn, I believe, the babysitter, on April 1st. So she gets a message from Helena to meet up. And at some point, I want to mention, at some point earlier on in that same day, Nicole withdrew $600 from an ATM. No one really knew why this was done by Nicole, but it was assumed and speculated that this money was meant to pay Helena Hearn Martin for her babysitting services. So apparently the arrangement was that on April 1st, Nicole would meet up with Helena Hearn, pay her the $600 for babysitting Arianna, and she would finally be able to retrieve Arianna because, as I've said, at that point she was staying at one of her co-workers' apartment and it was a better situation, and she could actually now get Arianna back to live with her. So things were kind of now finally on the up for Nicole. Now it is believed that Nicole, it's really choppy. Like I've heard, this is crazy, man. This is why this is so annoying to me about this case, is because there are two narratives of the day when when Nicole disappeared. The first narrative is that she is hanging out at the roommate's house and she receives a text message from Helena Hearn there was like some sort of emergency about Arianna and you have to meet me up, you know what I mean? And then she says to her roommate, I'll be back in 5 minutes. But then it doesn't make any sense because she leaves for way longer than those 5 minutes. And there's this other narrative that's, I think, portrayed on the FBI website that she left not from her roommate's home but from the local Best Buy, from her from her like employment. So dude, like, have you heard about like these two narratives? Because they are like, this is so annoying. Two narratives. I don't know if she left from her roommate's place or if she left from the Best Buy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have any additional. I do know that you mentioned that the 5 minutes thing, and what was interesting was that there's this so like we're supposed to be at the she was supposed to be meeting at, she said BJ's, I think, right? And then the only BJ's are like not 5 minutes away. They're fairly far from like where she was. So that didn't really make sense. But then there was a JB's. This is from another show. There was a JB maybe that she meant instead. Um, that was odd. But yeah, the whole thing starts to sound like a big setup, right?
Yeah, totally. Because so if you would look at the map really quickly, this is the Best Buy, this is the roommate's place, and this is the nearest BJ's. So if like she says to her roommates or to whomever in her employment that she's just going to the BJ's for 5 minutes, like there's no way she's going there for 5 minutes. This is like
And
an
then
hour
you gotta
drive.
fight your way down to the airport too. You see what's right next to it? The airport's right there. I mean, I remember going to the airport like in the day. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're sitting in traffic.
Yeah, well, at least I want to say that it was definitely not this BJ's. It couldn't have been, you know what I mean? It made no sense. So
Yeah.
it kind of looks like a potential setup here. Now, we don't know where she leaves from. Okay, I could have just went with one narrative and made it less confusing, but I guess, I don't want to do that here. So Nicole's co-worker and roommate, Goyot Williams, the same person who was, living here, as I've said, in her apartment, right? She receives a text message from Nicole at 12:45 a.m. By the way, Nicole leaves around 9:45 p.m. on April 1st, and now after midnight, 12:45 p.m., Nicole's phone is being used, and Nicole apparently texts her roommate Goyot that she was on her way to Fresno with some person named Sam. Okay, Fresno is like way, way down the line, and Fresno is like, let me check. Fresno is, Jesus Christ, like 150 miles as the crow flies. This is like a 4 to 5 hour drive at least, I believe. So, and no one knows who this Sam individual is. And that's not even the craziest part, because literally only around 30 minutes later, Nicole's Facebook account was used at 1:13 a.m. that same night, and it made a post stating, "Spending time with my 3-year-old, need this break." We have this Facebook post from Nicole Fitts. As you can see, you know what I mean? April 2nd, 2016 at 1:13 a.m. Now the crazy part is that just 30 minutes ago she sent a message to her roommate that she was going to Fresno, and then let's look at this. Look at this post. It says my 3-year-old. Now Arianna was 2, okay, not 3, and I think break. You don't type break like this. You know what I mean? Is BRAKE.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
also want to mention that
yeah,
Nicole was apparently a really good student. She would not be making grammar mistakes as well. So your take on this, dude? I just want to build this up again
yeah,
one more time, dude. One more time. She
yeah.
texts the roommate, "I'm going to Fresno with an individual named Sam that no one knows about." And she posts on Facebook 30 minutes later that she's with her 3-year-old and that she needs this break, with the word break written with grammar issues. Now, she had excellent grammar from what I've gathered, and her daughter was 2, not 3. This is where this thing like blows my head. You know what I mean?
I would say I agree with everything except for I'm going to just say that devil's advocate, the three, the three instead of two, and the break thing. Man, these phones with the autocomplete thing, or like you know what I mean, smudging it when you're trying to. I've seen everybody, like literally everybody, some of the smartest people in the world mistype things on Twitter and social media. So from
Yeah.
that, but like a lot of times the phone will just you'll do the word and it'll just finish it, or if you're like multitasking. But no, that being said, no, I agree with you. It's pretty fishy. I just don't find the spelling error as damning. I think as kind of like, once we talked about this before, constellation of things to look at that happened, then yeah, it does seem odd. But I think to me it's like probably the least suspicious, other than like you said, Fresno and all these other things where it's like, whoa, where was all that when she was living homeless, right?
Yeah, so I know I'm putting you on the spot, dude, here, but can you even dissect what's happening here? Because I literally can't even fathom what's
I
happening here.
I almost wonder. Well, okay, I'm going to say that I don't know that any of these plans were done by like geniuses, but I think that, let's say somebody got custody of her phone because something happened to her, then maybe for a second they were messing around and thinking they had to leave some kind of trail, and then they realized that this person doesn't seem to have a lot of support. You know what I mean? For all the people now that are supporting her, she was still extremely vulnerable, right? So from that, maybe at some point they were like, you know what, let's just do whatever it is we're going to do that we'll talk about, and not even go through the effort. I don't, it could be a lot of things, I guess.
But dude, once again, the text message was sent to Goyot Williams, Nicole's roommate. So whomever sent this text, then whomever sent this text, if it was not Nicole, must have known that Nicole's roommate was Goyot, unless like Nicole named Goyot in her phone, like Goyot Williams, my roommate. Unless that was, I'm pretty sure no one
Yeah,
names their
yeah, no,
contacts
you're right.
like that on the phone. So whomever.
Unless it's like roomy or something, right?
Exactly, dude. So what do you think is happening here? I feel like there might be a chance
Yeah.
that the text message was actually sent by Nicole. So this would mean that Nicole was in fact potentially heading to Fresno with this Sam person or whatever like that, but then shortly things kind of went south, you know what I mean? And someone then probably took her phone and made this post on Facebook, probably not realizing that a text message was already sent and that the previous text message would wouldn't make any, like, posting right now that you're spending time with your 3-year-old who's a 2-year-old would not make sense because a text message was already sent that you're going to Fresno. Yeah, I mean, your take on that whole
Yeah,
charade.
yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it is a little baffling that I mean, unless of course they had gotten the information from her. But yeah, no, it doesn't. It's kind of a big question mark in this whole narrative.
Yeah, totally, man. So, but this is not even the worst part. The worst part comes in soon after. Now, Nicole's missing, and she was only fully reported as a missing person on April 5th. Once again, she disappears on April 1st. Because she was 32, she's old enough to legally go missing. For legality reasons, she's only being, like, her disappearance is had begun to be investigated as a missing persons case only 4 days later. And now, 1 week later, on Friday, April 8th, a gardener at the John McLaren Park discovered a large plywood board resting underneath some ivy covered bushes with an odd silver shape painted on it. So, what am I talking about here? Look at the map, dude. I'm just gonna quickly. By the way, this is the John McLaren Park in San Francisco. This is one of the entrances, and really close to the entrance, to one of the entrances into this park, there's a playground, and right around this general location, right here, her body is found. Now it was in some sort of a makeshift grave, and it was covered by a piece of plywood. Okay, and this is the piece of plywood, and this is the silver painted shape right here. So it's been what's happening here, dude?
Yeah, it's really strange. What does it look like to you?
The shape really looks like nothing to me. It's been speculated that this could potentially be like some sort of a cult that potentially killed Nicole, but I will say to me it looks more like a random plywood was selected that just had like some unwashed graffiti on it, and what I mean. I kind of don't want to necessarily connect this painting to Nicole's murder because the painting looks kind of old. It doesn't look fresh. You know what I mean? It doesn't look like it was painted on to this plywood.
Yeah,
It looks like it's been there for years. You know what I mean?
it almost looks older than the wood it's on. In fact, it was. You know what I mean? Yeah, it almost looks like to me like I don't know. You ever seen like kind of Wayne's World, like devil hand, devil prongs kind of
Nah,
hand, or like a hang loose, but it's missing the thumb.
nah.
If you know the hang loose thumb, the hand. Well, Americans don't know what I mean. Yeah, hang loose Hawaiian hand sign. It looks a little bit like that. Yeah, no, it just looks like nothing. I mean, I know it looks like the. I don't know if you know the kids' book Where the Wild Things Are.
Nope.
Okay, yeah, it looks like the everyone's running around in like animal pajamas. That's what it looks like. It looks like a furry.
Yeah. So underneath this plywood, the body of Nicole Fitts was discovered in a fetal position. Once again, wanna remind everyone it was in this little location on the map right here on one of the entrances to the John McLaren Park in San Francisco. It is believed that Arianna, Nicole's daughter, was not with her mother, Nicole, when Nicole was murdered and buried in the John McLaren Park. After Nicole's body was discovered, police focused their attention on the individuals who watched over her 2-year-old daughter Arianna while Nicole was commuting back and forth to work. So these would be, once again, Ciolo and Helena Hearn. Efforts are still ongoing to locate the missing toddler, Arianna Fitts. The police has investigated homes in Eversville, Oakland, and Daly City, California. All of these locations are in and around the San Francisco area, and cited that the people who had last seen the still missing Arianna Fitts were uncooperative with the initial interview process. So the same Helena and Ciolo, they have been on no talking terms to the police, and I think they had a criminal lawyer now working for them who told them not to talk to the police because now they have been switched by law enforcement from witness status to person of interest status. Police identified the 3 people of interest at the press conference who were named as Helena and Devin Martin. You know, Helena being, once again, Helena Hearn Martin, her husband Devin Martin, and Ciolo Hearn. The sisters of Nicole Fitts told media outlets that they still believe that Arianna is alive, and one of the sisters told reporters that she believed someone wanted Arianna as their own child. Nicole's family created a website to highlight the search and offered a $10,000 reward to anyone with information that may help them locate Arianna and her safe return. Best Buy also offered a $10,000 reward for direct information regarding Arianna. Last year, in 2001, police raised the reward for information about Arianna to $100,000. In April of 2021, San Francisco police released a forensic sketch of Arianna that has been age progressed to 7 years of age. I want to quickly share this one. I believe this is the sketch. This is what Arianna would look like last year if she was 6. I think this was by a missing and exploited children, and I think this one was made by law enforcement. I want to quickly share these. I think it's very important. There's a good chance she's still alive, and I think we should share these with our audience members. But you can find these if you just Google Arianna Fitts. I'm sure Google Images will turn up her age progression image right here. So yeah, dude, your take on the whole timeline of the whole case, and yeah, now I finally have done presenting the case, and I guess we can discuss the theories and what we think about what happened here, man.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on with the image stuff. It's tricky too because she disappeared right in an age where she still looks like a baby, almost, right? Like it's almost I mean they try so hard to try to predict what she's gonna look at, but like we all kind of look a little different at different times in our lives sometimes. So yeah, that's the unfortunate reality is the older she gets, at least until she grows up and maybe looks like her mother, it might be kind of hard to find her from a lot of other people that are out there right now. So yeah, it's a really interesting case. It's frustrating because it's like kind of the main character. If Nicole is like the protagonist of our story, she's kind of I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean in a completely sympathetic and empathetic way. She's kind of a pathetic protagonist, unfortunately, because she tries so hard, but she's got so many things working against her. And, we don't have a good insight, I think, even into, whether there were other factors. Like, let's consider even the fact that there's 2 different children from this person at such a young age when they're totally unprepared financially. It does make you wonder if maybe there's like a little bit going on there in terms of, I mentioned this before, how much agency she has. By agency, I literally mean like whether she's able to like take charge of herself and whether, she might not have something going on where she's being taking advantage of people, because to me, it looks like a lot of people were taking advantage of her.
Yeah.
But especially, some of the central folks in our narrative.
Totally. I want to go through the interesting details in this case, and I think it's very good to speculate a little bit and maybe generate more interest in a few of these points. Maybe this will spark a breakthrough, when we have this conversation. Now, the first point is that, in 2017, there was a car that was found that was being tested regarding the case. And I think you found this little point of interest. Did you find anything else about this car that
No, I
apparently
didn't see
was?
any. Yeah, it was like that's one of the things about this case. There's not a lot on it, and even people will notice there's not even a lot of shows on it yet. Um, like, and then especially not. I think we're going to end up having the longest form content on it, that's immediately available. But yeah, there's like not a lot of detail, and it's interesting because like it's not for lack of effort, right? Her family now has been very vocal. And then yeah, but for this case, yeah, the FBI found something. They teased it. It was on the news. You can find YouTube clips from the news, and then nothing.
Yeah, totally. A few of the points that I found interesting that we already talked about was this painting on the board that covered Nicole's dead body at John McLaren's Park. I think we already speculated. We probably don't think that this is somehow connected to the case. It was like just a random plywood that was selected, right? Like, do you think that this painting has any sort of meaning behind it, in terms of like maybe a cult or something like that killed Nicole?
Nah, I found almost even the most credulous of YouTubers and other people looking at the case seem to mostly agree that it didn't seem to make sense. Why would they? There didn't seem to be any reason to publicize what happened, especially if you valued, the let's say the goal in this whole thing, which was, Arianna.
Mm,
You right? Why would you? I mean, I guess unless, of course, you could say, well, maybe it was supposed to be like a red herring. Maybe it was meant to throw, just like maybe some of those other messages we talked about earlier. Maybe it was somehow meant to throw people off in a
yeah,
different direction.
I totally see that. Now, Nicole had taken the $600 before she disappeared later on April 1st. We don't really know why she took out the $600. It's only speculated that they were taken out to pay the babysitter, Helena Hearn. You have any more thoughts on that, or shall we leave it at that it was mostly to pay the babysitter? I mean, that's the general narrative, and I would kind of agree with it, but is there any sort of other scenarios that may have led Nicole retrieving the $600 from the ATM?
Nothing that I can think of immediately, but I wouldn't put it past those same people to find some other reason to price gouge her for something. Like if it wasn't if what if the meeting wasn't like to get fired and get paid off, to go away, or then it does make you wonder what else are people speculating it could be.
Yeah, totally. Now, jumping to the more disturbing detail, some of the audience members might remember earlier on in the podcast, I mentioned that Helena Hearn Martin was previously incarcerated for killing the father of her child. And I didn't find any more information about Helena Hearn Martin, but this is kind of a very disturbing little point, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it is, but it also, I think, goes along with the theme of like the level of society that Nicole was dealing with, and I think that like who would become her peer group, and then it kind of makes sense at that point that some of them might have a murder rap.
Hmm. I have another interesting unverified detail, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. Allegedly, Nicole's phone pinged on the day when she was murdered, or the day when she disappeared on April 1st, at one of the two babysitters' family homes. So either at Ciolo Hearn's home or what's her name, Helena Hearn's home, but not their living homes, of course, because that would be like way too obvious. But like their like someone's parents' homes, like maybe Devin Martin's home, or like I don't know, Ciolo's parents' home, or like somewhere connected to the babysitters. You know what I mean? And police talked to those owners of those properties where the phone pinged, apparently, and they said that they don't even know who Nicole is. But this is unverified, so we kind of don't know this for a fact. But if it was such, if this did happen, then what do you think this means, man?
Yeah, man, I'm not sure. Not sure what that would spell out.
Yeah, I mean, potentially transported.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna get into it, yeah, I think that Ariana has been essentially disappeared into like some community or an extended community of people that know the central people in our narrative today.
Yeah. Now, authorities have footage of Nicole on the day when she disappeared around the John McLaren Park. This would make it seem like Nicole was murdered close to the park and not far away. And it kind of makes sense if her body was stashed in the park. Because, like, I don't think the park is the best place to stash a dead body. But if you kill someone nearby to this park, it's probably, and you don't have like means of transporting the body far away, maybe this does make sense. So kind of we get now a picture that we don't really know where in this map Nicole was captured on camera, but we know that her body was here close by. So your take on that, man? This would kind of make sense that she was killed nearby the park.
Yeah, yeah, it does make sense. I mean, otherwise, why that park, right? Like, why not? You know, especially with all this like traveling and stuff going on, why not drop her body any manner of places outside of San Francisco where it wouldn't be found? There's a lot of wilderness.
Exactly. Authorities stated they have evidence showing that on the same day when Nicole disappeared, April 1st, there was conflict between Nicole Fitts and Helena Hearn Martin, Ciolo Hearn, and possibly Devin Martin. And it's and it was sparked by Nicole trying to get Arianna back. So there's proof. I think potentially text messages, I would assume, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it seems like it. I mean, for all these people of interest, if you could actually get, I suspect this doesn't exist, but if you could get like text records for them more extensively of all the devices they use, I bet you'd find a lot.
Yeah, totally. Authorities apparently have around 30,000 pieces of evidence in this case. That's a lot of pieces of evidence. Once again, it baffles me, like the amount. So 30,000 pieces of evidence, like, what is this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you brought it up because on like a book I read that kind of intersects with this topic a bit, they were profiling homicide detectives here in LA during this one period. And it was interesting because like one of the detectives, that was his whole thing, was like getting down all the facts and like, you know, just this huge like notebook, this like collection things. Like you said, like 30,000 pieces of evidence. It's a lot of stuff. But then the other detective, his thing was like he would resist doing that, and his thing was like a lot of legwork and knocking on doors and talking to people and like trying to actually get the case to move, because from his perspective that information collection is not productive if it's not productive. And I think that the real truth is somewhere in between, I guess.
I see. And yeah, I think that's lastly, that's all of the interesting details that I had compiled about this case. Now, I think, I don't know, before we jump to our final conclusions and theories on who killed Nicole and where is Arianna and if she is still even alive, anything else you want to add? Because I don't want to
Yeah,
jump past.
I haven't done this for a little while, but I had a little bit of a mini rant I wanted to go on. I had just some quick points. Hopefully, we'll get through this pretty quick, and we can finish it off. But this case, I surprisingly, I mean, we've read a lot of emotional cases, especially lately, and every case has we only look at it because it has a major human element, makes us interested in it. But this one was bothering me. I think some of it was bothering me because the main victim, the person that lost her life, Nicole, and then presumably also lost her child to someone else. Man, she'd had a bad start in life through things that some of which that she had nothing to do with, and she didn't ask her mom to die, she didn't ask to be born to a single mother, she didn't ask for all these things to happen, and she seems to have like really tried and done a lot in the early part of her life. And I don't know if it's just a combination of like her mom dying and other things going on that might have worn her down. I don't know if if she had any mental issues, but she became an at-risk person. Um, and she's living in this like just eternal state of poverty. I mean, and not just poverty like that is kind of endemic to a lot of the world and even the first world or the developed world, and even here in the U.S. and a lot of urban areas. But she's really living in like the margins of that. So I'll stick a pin in that. But I was a little bit shocked. Now you have, I guess, like her sisters and everybody. Obviously, they would like to find Arianna, and they've done a really good job right now of publicizing the case. I kind of wonder how much how much they tried to get their sister to not live on the streets or not live in homeless shelters and things like that. Like it sounds like there was some attempt to make that work, and for all we know, it could be that like this is just like you're trying to talk another adult into doing something that's for their own good, and they don't want to do it. So like this living in San Francisco thing, case in point, was just ridiculous. I mean, I know supposedly there's like some kind. I don't know if there's some kind of, maybe someone will write to us after this and tell us that no, Glenn, there's free health insurance for people exactly in this at-risk group in San Francisco, and that's why it's really good for you. But I don't see that. I mean, from my perspective, it's one of the most expensive cities to live in. Um, the social services are very overstretched at this point, but even back then were. And I know somebody who um, I knew for several years, and they live in San Francisco now, and they're definitely in an at-risk, couple of at-risk groups, and they've had to kind of live, I think, even in a better situation than Nicole was living in, and it was scary for me to hear. I mean, she was having people killed in like her same building, drug deals in the hallways, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I don't know why she was so fixated on the San Francisco area after a certain point, once her sister kind of bailed out on the whole plan. But I'm sort of like, I have a big question mark around that. And I'm not willing personally, and I know you have a different opinion about this, but I'm not willing personally to be as charitable as I've seen some of the other YouTubers where they kind of fall over themselves and make a lot of like excuses and like say how great everybody is. I think no doubt there's a lot of nice people on Nicole's side and Ariana's side and her family, but like some of these decisions and things and like like it is kind of like a, without getting political, it does make you think of like gosh, I mean, this is sort of the consequences of not having birth control or not having like guidance or whatever it is. It's there was a lot of mistakes made and ongoing mistakes, and at some point you would have hoped that some other adult would have really been more forceful, but instead you end up with these awful street preacher people who I've read some books on these topics, and there's some interesting ones by some like cultural anthropologists, sociologists, who have gone and essentially they'll be like kind of like like me, grew up in a middle class, upper middle class family. And they went to like a nice university, and they're part of their graduate work. All of a sudden, they're like, in downtown Baltimore, someplace like that, and like housing projects. And they soon find out that for some good portion of Americans are living in a totally different society in some ways, even though in theory they should have, every protection of rule of law and, civil rights, etc. But the reality is, for lots of reasons, sometimes because the population is vulnerable, some of the population isn't really like making the great decisions for themselves because they're not necessarily all there mentally. And talking about like homeless people, or people with mental problems, depression, etc., bipolar, whatever the reason, they're sort of subject to like this group of peers. And this is where like the street preacher types come in, some of which could be very nice people and well-intentioned. But there's kind of like, and this came out in these books I read in the topic, there's sort of like this gray area of like street preacher or like reverend/con artist. And there's a lot of that going on, where sometimes there's some of both. Like, we'll save your soul and then we'll kind of steal from you a little bit, to kind of like, this is my job, I gotta eat too. So I'm gonna, what I always kind of find is funny is you have like street preachers trying to give advice to people that like often are not doing any better than, sometimes are doing better than them. You know what I mean? So like, it's kind of like the ignorant preaching to the ignorant sometimes not. But whatever the reason, it's clear here that like that, what's her name again? Lamani? I can't even.
Yeah, her name is.
Everybody messes up this name, even on YouTube.
Yeah, I have it here. Give me a second, man. It's
like I just want to call her the street
Lamasani.
preacher.
Lamasani.
Oh, Lamasani. Yeah, Lamasani. She's. I mean, I really think that what you had with that person was somebody that was. I don't know if this is just my opinion, right? I don't know if this is like something that happened before, or if it was just fortuitous. It was just like, hey, you stumble into the situation where you're trying to help someone out, and then you end up kind of taking care of her kid, and I guess if we were to play devil's advocate and take Lemasani's side for a second, let's say, because we have this side from everybody else that says Lemasani's the bad guy, and her family members are the bad guys, and they did this. Pretend that you're them, and I'm not saying they're right, but could one empathize with them and say, they see this person who's making one wrong decision after another. She's already got one kid in the court system now, maybe facing the foster parent system. I don't know. I'm not really clear on what's going on with her father, whether her father also couldn't care for Cindy, the other daughter, or whether it was like her trying to get the other daughter, trying to get Cindy back, which seems very ill-advised, right? You can't even afford childcare for your one kid, and now you want the other one back. So that doesn't make sense to me with that. So that also seems like a bad decision. So imagine, for all this, if you're like this sort of like call it the underground or the street, you're sort of like the level of society where like, maybe it's to the point where you feel like the authorities don't even care about you anymore. Maybe they're not even watching you that carefully because you're not one of these like, special upper middle class taxpayers that make a lot of noise and pay a lot of taxes and expect the cops to, earn their tax money. But like, you're somebody who's living in kind of this at risk, vulnerable, and often kind of like high crime level of society, and there's just people taking advantage of each other. It's overwhelming. I mean, even in this case in point, for Arianna, you've mentioned there's been this kind of major effort on both federal, state, and local level. They've made this effort. You've got all these relatives and other people looking out. You've got YouTubers, you've got volunteers. Like, that's a lot of resources for one person. Now amplify that across, multiple, many households, thousands, millions of households across America. And it's like, it's too many problems to solve. So I really think that in that case, I'm getting around to I'm going to finish it now. My theory is that the quote unquote street, the underground, that essentially, at some point Nicole didn't mesh herself with, though she tried to kind of pull herself away. And that doesn't mean illegal activities. It just means sort of a a society that in some ways is in the gray area of the law or the rest of the society, or even like legal practices. I think the street took away her kid and said, hey, this is a kid that like could be doing something. I don't think she was human trafficked in terms of like, being forced into prostitution or some other kind of insidious thing like we suspect might have happened to other children and abduction victims. I think that like literally someone, because this does happen, you know, there's some amount of kidnappings are people that literally want a kid to raise. And like this happens all the time apparently in I'll just give an example, China, where they used to have the one child policy. When people couldn't have a kid or couldn't have the kid they wanted, they would like kidnap some other really young kid from another town, and then the whole town they were in would keep their mouths shut. So imagine that can happen in China with some of the harshest laws in the world. Imagine that could very easily happen in a community that's not being policed very effectively.
Right. Well, dude, you can.
That's a big mouthful, man. Thank you for letting me just run with that. But yeah, I had to get it out.
No, man, I knew you had something in you today, special here. Now, yeah, because my whole thing about this case when I was looking at it, I still really want to find out like and talk about like what happened to Nicole and what happened to her daughter Arianna. Okay, so we kind of already like I'm not even gonna come close, so I'm not even gonna try to explain the social environment and narrative because I think you talked about it like a lot and you gave your take and definitely good points there. I want to now jump to a few questions. So Nicole is murdered. We don't know much about her state, how she was found, but what do you think happened to Nicole's? Um, do you think she was murdered? I think she was murdered on the same day when she disappeared because she did appear on CCTV next to this park soon before, she was potentially murdered. So I will say she must have been murdered around this park area, but by whom? She was allegedly meeting the babysitters. She was allegedly meeting Helena Hearn. Helena Hearn already had murdered her previous ex-husband. So she is someone who's known and is able to murder. We don't know how she murdered the ex-husband. So it kind of leads me to believe that Helena Hearn, in my opinion, is the main suspect here. Wouldn't you agree? In terms of the murder.
Well, yeah, I mean, or at least, well, or at least associated with orchestrating something too. That would be the other suspicion, right? The other opinion
Okay.
about how she could be involved, right? Because let's figure someone like that who apparently is getting money. I mean, they're getting paid for
Babysitting.
they're getting paid by Nicole. Then like some amount of that they're pocketing. It's not like a net, you know what I mean? It's not like net zero to them. I'm sure they built some profit into their prices, and it seems like to me it's all profit, honestly, for how they're charging for those rates. Yeah, it just I don't know. I'm sorry, man. I just lost my train of thought for a second.
Oh, it's okay, dude.
You
Yeah.
might have to, yeah.
No, it's
What was the last thing you said?
yeah. I was just asking. Do you think that Nicole was murdered by Helena Hearn or?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that's where I was going. So yeah, I think that like especially so that kind of goes along with my thesis. And once again, I understand. I'm pretty biased towards my one theory in this one for sure. I think more than other cases. I think that it might be easy to find somebody who would take like $1,000 or a couple $1,000 to like shoot at somebody and then just leave. And then they're like, well, they're never connected to me because I don't know that person. You know what I mean? So like if they never get caught, whatever the murder the murder technique was that was used, the cause of death, I think that maybe they found somebody. I feel like you don't even have to do the dirty work at that point because you're making money apparently from at least one person, if not more.
Yeah, okay. So murder for hire to kill Nicole. I kind of don't think that was the case because I think like that would cost a lot of money. I feel like it must have been someone from Helena Hearn's environment, like that would do it for free, kind of, maybe even herself.
Yeah, Could be. Yeah, you got a point. Maybe maybe they're just like, I can do it myself. Um, I'm just saying that, like, you are next to an area that's pretty high crime, and that does have some good amount of drug addicts that might, be willing to do something for a relatively small amount of money.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about like a mob hit here, right? We're not talking about like a 10 grand, kill my husband type thing. We're talking about like, here's somebody that apparently society just barely cares about right now until she's dead, of course, and then everybody cares about her. Like, let's pay you a couple $100 and then we're gonna take this kid and leave the state.
Right. But then once again, what about Arianna? Because apparently Arianna was staying with these two individuals, either Ciolo or Helena Hearn. So how are these two individuals, Ciolo and Helena, still free? Like, if you have you had the missing child in this case last, and you don't talk to police, the police come to your house like, where's Arianna? You're babysitting Arianna, and they're like, we don't know, we don't want to talk to you, we have no comment. Like, how does that work? Like, don't you get like jailed or immediately, like on the spot?
Well, yes and no. So you can't be forced to self-incriminate. So that might be what they're leaning on. They're just like, well, I can't, like my lawyer says, I don't need to talk to you because the thing I say might violate the Fifth Amendment clause for self-incrimination. So that may well be what's going on there. I also could see, like, you always think like, well, if you just sat on them, and by sitting on them, I mean, like, if you put someone to do surveillance on them, if you put a surveillance team on them, eventually you would think that you could follow the, like at some point they're going to go see the kid, right? If the kid's secreted away somewhere. So you would think you would stumble on it. So that's where someone might say, hey, the cops are not treating this. This is always like the missing white woman syndrome thing, right? Where it's like the theory that some people say that they feel like some classes of victims are treated better than other classes of victims by the system. Now, I don't know if that's the case here. I mean, because the FBI and everybody did get involved as they're supposed to get involved. So maybe someone else would say, well, just because they did the minimum doesn't mean that they did like what it took to actually solve this case.
Right. So lastly, before we sign out, I think the question is, where is Arianna? Do we believe that Arianna is still alive, or is she dead? I think the general consensus, at least what I've gathered from investigators and the family members of Arianna, Nicole's sister, they believe that Arianna is still alive somewhere. So to me, looking at it, I'm thinking, if she was still alive, she would probably came up somewhere by now. Because, like, where are you keeping Arianna? Because Arianna is clearly not staying with Ciolo or Limassani, because these people are probably like tracked all the time. So clearly, Arianna is no longer with anyone mentioned in this case, in my opinion. So where is Arianna, and why do law enforcement believe that she might still be alive? Because I don't know, like, as dreadful as it may seem, I would be more leaning towards that maybe she's not alive. Because I mean, if she's alive, then where is she? Like, has she been sold to someone else, either for like, I don't know, not necessarily like for any like for devious reasons or anything like that, maybe like sold just for illegal, like I don't know, illegal adoption, underworld adoption scheme. I don't know, but like, these things don't really seem that realistic to me, because like the people that were babysitting Arianna, I don't know if they would have those connections to and like sell someone for like legal adoption, because they're not keeping Arianna. So if they're not keeping Arianna, who are they throwing? Arianna would be like a hot potato here. Like, who are they throwing Arianna to? In my opinion, there's, as like sad as it may sound, like there's a higher percent chance that Arianna is also dead. I kind of find it hard to believe that she's alive, like living with some other family, because like who would take Arianna? It's a highly publicized case. Like who would take Arianna? Like isn't that like a crazy dangerous thing to do? And Arianna is clearly not with the babysitters. So in your opinion, where's Arianna, man?
Well, just to answer that question, I think she's in some urban. I would say biggest chance she's in some urban area somewhere. Once again, like a housing project area or someplace that's like a community that she can hide in, or that whoever has custody of her can hide in, or maybe someplace that's rural instead. That's like that maybe the family members of whoever like the what I mean, relatives of whoever took her
Yeah.
live. So it's like it's an easy place. Oh, let's just go back to Arkansas. Let's go back to Atlanta. Let's go back to Missouri, whatever state it is,
Mm.
Ohio, and we can just stick her with grandma on the farm, and we get to still see her on the sly. And because we care about her so much, that's why we killed her mom, right? Because the whole thing is, why kill the mom unless you want the kid,
I feel
and
like,
why take, you know what I
but
mean?
dude, don't you think that like everyone on the babysitter side would have been completely like investigated like insanely, like literally
Yeah,
everyone, like
that
30,000 pieces of evidence, dude. I feel like, yo, there's, in my opinion, I just want to put a stamp here. I see zero ways how how the daughter, how Ariana is anywhere near anyone mentioned in this case. I personally, I just completely don't see how, like, wouldn't, like, because FBI is on this case. Like, this is like a highly publicized FBI like released podcast about this stuff. So,
well,
yeah.
I mean, first of all, I would never underestimate the other people's foolishness, right? So lots of people think that they can get away with things that they don't get away with.
Right.
So that's, I mean, that to me, that's not a reason to not do something, because people obviously they still do it all the time. But I really think that the central characters in this case, that they are so living on the fringes of society, and it is so hard to get evidence on them, because these are the kind of people that may not even have social security numbers that they use for anything. These may be the kind of people that, when you're talking about what kind of people I'm talking about people that live in maybe a gray market or black market, like an underground. By black market, I mean the underground. I don't mean anything specific about any group of people. I mean the underground. I think it's a group of people that live in the underground, are very used to escaping official oversight. I think that they're very different than a lot of the people in our case, because like a lot of other, the other cases we've covered, because a lot of the other cases we've covered, like almost all of these people have some kind of like middle class life that they're living. They have a house, they have an apartment, they've got bills, they've got things going on. Of course, the people in our case today have bills and things to pay too, but these bills don't all come with official like invoices in the mail, right? Like were they giving Nicole invoices for the childcare? Was she filing taxes and including those invoices, against the taxes she would have to pay, or the money she would get? That stuff wasn't going on. So that's what I mean. Is this is like, I feel like to some extent there are like some old tricks that are being used that kind of work better now, when everything is so digital and record driven. If you can find somebody that's still living outside of that, you kind of you like all the things that work for everybody else. It's like everyone else is stuck to this web, this digital web, right? Anything you and I do, we walk down the street, our cell phone is followed down the street. We buy something, that's followed by all these credit agencies. But like, what if you're someone that doesn't have any kind of credit report? What if you're somebody that really could like maybe go across the border to Mexico to somebody through another connection, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, the FBI is not going to get you.
Yeah.
Good luck,
Yeah.
until and then once again, because we've covered so many cases, it's like there are so many missing children, and there's so much the FBI has to deal with right now. I mean, we won't even get into the political situation in the US. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. I see. No, that's a good point. I'm kind of curious to see what the the audience members think about this. Cause yeah.
I do have one actually
All right.
happy thing I would like to say though, because I think you were going this direction, is like what happens next. What I think happens next if she's alive, because I do still think maybe there's like a 25% chance, even though she's like her being alive and her being someone's kid
Mm-hmm.
seems to have been the goal. Like you said, like kind of an underground adoption, illegal adoption. But what I think maybe will happen, and this really, this is like the kind of the important part. Maybe this is the audience participation part in terms of like how the audience feels about this topic might influence how they, let's say, relate to their elected officials and government officials and police agencies and things like that, and who they vote for judge and things like that. Well, one of the big things was, as I mentioned, there's like this DNA triangulation thing where they can take the DNA of somebody and then search these records and find somebody that's related to that person, and then like find out whatever it is you're trying to find out. And this got overturned recently in a very specific murder case, a very notable murder case where they solved solved a cold case, and some kind of technicality on the way this was done led them to overturn the conviction. Well, okay, whichever way that goes, my hope is eventually children like this, because this is far from the only child that's been abducted and passed off as someone else's own child, even right now. My hope is some of these children, as they do start running into these inevitable, because we know it's true, right? You and I at some point are going to end up giving a DNA sample to some kind of government agency or other agency that's connected to these databases. And what's going to happen is someone that's related to Arianna is going to do this, and they're going to be able to. I think actually what will happen is she'll go to a school somewhere, or some other job, or some other, something will happen. She'll have a contact with the system. They'll take a DNA sample and they'll go, "Oh, you're this person we've been looking for." And now we're able to do that much more quickly because it's like 5-10 years later, and all that stuff's like on the the metaverse.
Oh yeah, no, that's an interesting way to think about it. But yeah, I think we kind of talked about everything we wanted to talk about this week. So I think we probably gonna close it off. I just wanted to ask the audience members, what do you think happened in this case? What do you think happened? Like, who do you think killed Nicole, and what do you think is the fate of Arianna? As I've said, a lot of people believe that she might still be alive, so it's good if you guys shared her poster. And yeah, guys, I think we're gonna be signing off this week, and I hope the rest of your week is gonna be great, and we can't wait to see you on the next week's show. Please all have a wonderful rest of the weekend. Stay safe and peace out.